Back-to-back seasons, the Bengals have missed the playoffs. Back-to-back seasons, you circle the month of September, and that seems to be the main culprit right there. Obviously, 2 years ago, Joe Burrow getting hurt obviously didn't help. But September, 1-3 start in 2024 in the month of September, 1-3 start in the month of September in 2023. Back-to-back seasons where you get off to a hot start. Then they obviously get rolling, one of the hottest teams in football, and they spend the rest of the season trying to dig themselves out of a hole that they created themselves in the first month. You obviously, I know you guys focused on the schedule release from 2 nights ago. We now know what the Bengals schedule looks like. We've always known who they're going to play. We now know when they're going to play them. The month of September for the Cincinnati Bengals, they open up the season at Cleveland on September 7th, and then they'll welcome in the Jacksonville Jaguars for a 1 p.m. kickoff on the 14th. Then they'll be on the road for the next 2. They're on the road for 3 of the first 4 games in the month of September, at Minnesota on the 21st and at Denver on the 29th. That's what their schedule looks like for the month of September, guys. So buy or sell, the Cincinnati Bengals will finish September with at least 3 wins. Buy or sell.
I'm selling it. I don't think there's any way the Bengals make it through those 4 games with 3 wins. My initial prediction, I had them losing to Cleveland and at Denver on Monday Night Football. I think it'd be crazy to say that they're going to get through that stretch with 3 wins. It's much harder than it's been the last few years, and this team doesn't start hot. So hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully I'm losing money those first few games trying to hedge my emotions, but man, if the Bengals don't start fast this year, they're digging themselves a serious hole. You got a division game in week 1. You got another AFC game in week 2. Those are the 2 biggest ones you got to get. Obviously, you'd love to beat Minnesota. You'd love to beat Denver. And then as we get into October, there's some tough games as well. But you got to win those first 2 games against easier teams on your schedule to try to get the ball rolling. If they start 2-0, I think it's a lock that they get to 3 and maybe even 4. But if they start 1-1 or, God forbid, 0-2, it could snowball pretty quickly. So I'm going to sell this just out of a lack of optimism. There's going to be some serious organizational change by how we start this season.
I wanted to sell it, but they have to know, like Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow, they for whatever reason, it doesn't work in September. Whatever method they have, it just stops working once you start the season. I'm hoping they realize that now, because that like Joe Burrow has to look back at that Patriots game every night. And he has to say, what happens if I showed up for 20% more of that game? They win that game, they make the playoffs, and who knows what they do when you're playing your best football come the postseason, which is what they were doing. They have to look at that and say, you know what, all right, whatever goes wrong this offseason, whatever that drama is with Trey Hendrickson, I don't know when we're going to sign our first-round draft picks. Whenever all this stuff concludes, we need to be ready for week 1. You have to beat the Browns. And to be quite honest, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to your former team, Kenner, that game shouldn't be close. I mean, it just shouldn't be close. The Bengals need to win that game. They need to come out hot. They need to come out strong. And they need to dominate. They need to show they can dominate in September, because they haven't shown that yet. The Jaguars, I don't believe, are a good team. I think they might be underrated by me and pretty much everybody else. But I don't think they're that good. I still don't think they're a great team. If you don't start 2-0 this year, I don't know when you'll ever start 2-0. I don't. I don't think the Vikings are good. I think you're going to be able to beat the Vikings given the quarterback situation. So who knows? I think the Bengals, if you're not going to do it this year, you're never going to do it. I'm going to say Joe Burrow thinks about that Patriots loss in week 1 last year, and he learns from it, and he grows from it, and they're able to beat the Cleveland Browns in dominating fashion, take that momentum to play Jacksonville at home. You win that one, and then from there, I think it starts the avalanche of, all right, the Bengals are ready to go this season. So I'm gonna say they start with 3 wins. I'm gonna buy this. Because I think that this is the year they have to. Back-to-back missing the postseason seasons, and they're not going to go for 3.
Fair enough. Again, buy or sell the Cincinnati Bengals getting at least 3 wins in the first month of the season after 1-3 starts in the last 2 seasons in the month of September. 3 of the first 4 games this season for your Bengals. For our Bengals are on the road, of course, at Cleveland, at home against Jacksonville, and then, of course, you have Minnesota and Denver on the road. I think that Denver game is going to be tough, especially on the road, but that'll be in prime time. Cincinnati always rises up. They always play their best games in those spots, which is wild because that used to be their Achilles heel as far as that goes. Guys, what is a what record do they have to have in September for it not to be put in the category of a slow start? Because that's the narrative with this team, is the slow start every year. What's the record that they have to have at the end of September for it not to be deemed a Zach Taylor Cincinnati Bengals traditional slow start to the season?
2-2 is more than fine. You're an underdog in 2 of those games on the road. I'm really not worried if you lose to a Minnesota team that won 14 games last year and a Denver team that made the playoffs as well, with probably one of the worst defensive matchups for the Bengals in the entire league. They have the best secondary by a mile when it comes to outside corners and safety help, which is obviously what the Bengals like to do at a higher percentage than anyone in the league. So that's a nightmare matchup, and Bo Nix proved that he can do a lot, and we don't know what the secondary is going to look like on our side of things going into that game, and they have some serious weapons. So, yeah, the Broncos scare me quite a bit, and I think Minnesota's going to be a sneaky team as well. If you can get to 2-2, I really don't care how you do it. It's definitely the easiest to explain if you beat Cleveland and Jacksonville and then lose those 2 away games.
Fair enough. All right. So one of the reasons, or one of the things that's interesting about that week 1 matchup with Cleveland is obviously with all the changes that the Bengals have made to this roster, whether it be obviously extensions done to current stars like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and putting those distractions behind them. You bring in Al Golden. Obviously, there's a lot of faith that a lot of the same players from previous seasons, just again, another season, more experience and all that. There's going to be a gradual improvement on the defensive side. Possibly started to see that towards the tail end of last year. But again, we all know how important Trey Hendrickson is when it comes to how this team is going to operate defensively. Buy or sell, with all the noise going on right now with Trey Hendrickson, guys, buy or sell Trey Hendrickson sitting out week 1 against the Cleveland Browns for your Bengals?
I'm going to buy it. I think he misses week 1, and I think that's it. I think he's back out there in week 2 at home against the Jaguars. If week 1 was at home, I would sell this. I think they're going to have it worked out by their home opener against the Jaguars. I do think he misses week 1 against the Browns.
I'm going to sell it. I think he's going to play. I think all these threats of him not playing, I think that all sounds good right now in May when you're able to flaunt that a little bit. When it comes time to paying fines and losing millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think you're going to have a different attitude. So whether or not he's going to be happy playing for the Bengals in week 1, that's a different story. He's going to be in a jersey, I believe, week 1. I don't think he's going to be willing, as somebody who clearly needs the money, I don't think he's going to be willing to lose money.
And I hear that when people say, well, he needs the money. I think it's just one of those where he is literally watching that position, financially explode around the league. And although, he's getting the 16 or 20, whatever it is, it's just one of those. I don't think he's poor by any means. I just think it's like it sickens him knowing how much he's producing, that he's not getting the same dollar amounts of the Crosbys and the Garretts and the others. Obviously, if we would have done this a week ago, Elliot, I would have agreed with you. I would have said there's no chance he sits out games or whatever. But what we saw the other day, that was not unhinged by any means, but that was an emotional reaction on his end. He got pissed because Zach Taylor texted him to remind him that he would be fined if he doesn't arrive for practices. That was something that I didn't think was that big a deal. I thought it was common sense, but that triggered him. He showed up unannounced. We had Jay Morrison on earlier in the week, and that's what I found most interesting about. Another interesting point about our conversation with him is Jay and no media member expected him to show up to practice that day, and it wasn't as if they announced that, hey, he is going to show up today. He's going to address the media at the beginning of practice. He just walked in. He walked over to the side of the field. The media started to gather around him, and for 23 minutes, just unhinged, just went off on everything that he possibly could to give his side. I think he's very emotional, and unless he calms down, and I don't think he will, I think it's going to just stew in him for the next couple of months, and I think it's going to get even more frustrating when camp gets around. After what we saw the other day, I'm on Jacob's side on this one. I'm going to buy it. I think he at least sits out, kind of like that Chris Jones thing from a few years ago with the Chiefs, that they ended up losing that game, too, against the Lions, and then all of a sudden you start to feel that angst a little bit. And then Jones gets a deal done. The front office gets a deal done. Maybe that's something similar that happens here. I don't know. But I do buy it. I buy him sitting out week 1 if something doesn't get resolved between now and when training camp starts. Casey, where are you? Buy or sell Trey Hendrickson sitting out week 1 against the Browns?
Yeah, I buy it. I think that there's a good chance that he sits out week 1. I don't know how many games past that he sits out, but that's the only leverage he has. And he's going to not lose a bunch of money either. So week 1 seems like a lock. Week 2 is kind of up in the air. And I think the Bengals will eventually get him done too. So yeah,
It won't be. It won't be the whole season. We all know this because the only person that's done it in the modern era is Le'Veon Bell, and that was a complete and utter failure on Le'Veon Bell's part. So I think he has to know that it's not going to work if he does that, and it's gonna. I mean, I don't want to use the word bankrupt, but it's going to put a pretty serious dent in his finances if he were to do that. So he's not going to do that. You mentioned that it makes him sick that what that position's valued at now. I wish his agent knew that. I wish his agent knew that, and I wish he knew it when he signed the initial contract that he's playing under right now, that he's obligated to play under. I wish they were aware of that 2 years ago or last year or every single year that he complains about this contract. I thought he looked absolutely terrible. When he spoke to the media or whatever that was on the practice field while his teammates were working their ass off behind him, and he's sitting there in that golf polo. Like I wish he probably knew how bad he came off. At least to me, as a fan of the Bengals, as somebody who likes Trey Hendrickson, like I don't want to see Trey Hendrickson miss games. I don't want to see our guy, upset with the organization. But he is because of decisions that he made, of decisions that his agent made. That's not the Bengals. That's Trey Hendrickson. He's not sitting out games. I don't believe so.
All right, next up as we wrap up buy or sell with the Cincinnati Bengals here. Buy or sell, Joe Burrow winning his first MVP in 2025. Buy or sell?
I'm going to sell it because I'm more optimistic about this Bengals season, and I hope they win some games. I mean, I think it's very tough to give a quarterback an MVP when you put one season next to the last one, and the numbers are significantly worse. And if the Bengals are going to win 11, 12, 13 games this year, compete for the AFC North, and try to win a Super Bowl like a lot of us think their ceiling is, Joe Burrow's numbers are going to be a lot worse than last year.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have a defense that can get stops, and you're going to have a run game that's somewhat competent in the first 5 weeks of the season, and you're going to be able to dribble the clock out, and you're going to be able to control the time in the games and have more regimented possessions and not have to go 70-yard bombs every single time you get the ball because you have to score immediately because you're going to have to score again. You can't give them the last possession. Hopefully that's not the case for the Bengals this year. And sitting here in May, I still have optimism that this is going to be a playoff team and a really good, close to well-rounded team. And when I say well-rounded, I just mean not 27th, I mean 16th. That's all I want.
Fair.
And that leads this team to be pretty close to what we need them to be to compete for a Super Bowl. So for those reasons, I think it's going to help the Bengals if Joe Burrow doesn't play worse this year, but has worse counting numbers. And I think that'll cost him an MVP, and I think it could help the Bengals win a Super Bowl.
I'm going to buy it. I think Joe Burrow wins an MVP this year. I think he's playing the best football of his career. I think he's coming off an offseason where he gets all of his weapons back. He gets Mike Gesicki, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins all back with him. I think they're going to be dominant this year. I think they're going to take a look at what last year, and they're going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder. They knew last year, probably around Game 5, that if they don't score 55 points, they're not going to win football games. And I think this year he knows what he has to do. He has to play perfect, he has to show up, and he has to show out. That's what Joe Burrow is going to do this season. I think he's going to win the MVP. I firmly believe that. He didn't win the MVP last year because they didn't win enough games. My argument this year is that he's going to win enough games.
Yeah, that was my big pushback last year when people were adamant that he should have won MVP last year. I just said this isn't a Bengals take or a Burrow take. It's just I'm not a fan of any quarterback winning an MVP when you don't make the playoffs. And even if it wasn't his fault, that's just kind of where I stood on the matter. Jake brings up a lot of good points because I think we talked about this last season. It wasn't a shot at Burrow, but I thought a lot of the stats that he threw up last year were inflated due to team circumstances, not his fault. I mean, that's why he's elite, is because you could win games with him not throwing for, you could win games in a season where he's not throwing for 4,700 yards and 40 touchdowns. But when you have no other options offensively or defensively, he can also throw for 4,700 yards and 40 plus touchdowns and the completion percentage through the roof and everything else. It would be interesting if last season's numbers cost him an MVP this upcoming season, because I'm with Jake. I don't think his numbers are going to come close to what they were last year, but as Bengals fans, you shouldn't want that either. I know that sounds weird. You should not want Joe Burrow throwing for 4,700 yards and 40 touchdowns, because if that's the case, that means you're behind in a lot of games. That means you're being forced to not hand the ball off and run the football. That means you can't run the football. That means your defense is bad. I think if he has a statistically worse, and I'm saying worse in quotations here, if he has a statistically worse season than last year, That's a good thing because that means that they're not as dependent on his arm to go out there and single-handedly win football games. Now it's just going to be up to the voters if they look at that and say, well, he regressed from one season to the next, and that's absolutely not what it's going to be. It's just going to be a matter of perception. I will say I'm going to buy it if they win the division. I think even if Jake, if his numbers are worse than last year, if they win the division, I think he's MVP this year as far as that goes. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Everett Henry does put a good point in the chat, and he said that weren't Josh Allen's numbers worse the year he won MVP than the year before, and he's absolutely right. But I think that what drove that was voter fatigue against Lamar Jackson. I think that could work in Joe Burrow's favor this year. If it's those three at the top, and all three of their numbers are pretty similar, and Joe is ahead of Lamar in the AFC North standings, I think he could get that nod as they try to spread all this stuff out among these great quarterbacks in the league. I think there is somewhat of a goal of the NFL not to have all of these MVPs. You can't control Super Bowls, but not to have all these MVPs in one spot. Mahomes already has two. Lamar has two. Josh Allen. I think they would like to get Burrow one. So if the Bengals are good enough and he puts up good enough numbers, I could certainly see them leaning that way in an effort, not necessarily for anything Joe Burrow did or didn't do, but if there's an excuse to give it to him, to give him the acknowledgement maybe he deserved last year.
Right or wrong, fair or not, I am curious your guys' thoughts. Will the fact that he has Jamar and T work against him in that consideration? One thing, and I know I annoyed people last year with this. It wasn't a trolling thing. I was a fan of Josh Allen winning the MVP, even over Lamar, because I thought he did more with less. I know he had a hell of a run game, very good offensive line, but he wasn't throwing to the same receivers that, pass catchers even that a Patrick Mahomes had or a Justin Herbert or some of these other hell, even Jalen Hurts, and I don't put him in the category with the Josh Allens and Joe Burrows. But if all things are equal and all quarterbacks are having a great season, do you think that works against Joe Burrow, the fact that, okay, well, he has Jamar and T, those others don't, and look what they're doing? Does that work against Joe Burrow in your opinion?
No, because the metrics that go into quarterback assistance and all the other stats and how much they help, the stats incorporate offensive line and defense and everything as well. And the Bengals are significantly worse than the Bills or Ravens or Chiefs in all of those categories. Josh Allen actually led the league in terms of that quarterback help stat last year with the best offensive line of MVP candidates by a significant margin, the best run game of MVP candidates without quarterback rushing by a significant margin. And the Chiefs, obviously, we know what Steve Spagnuolo has been able to do on defense. So there's a lot more that goes into what a quarterback's helped by than just what big name receivers does he have. I know, Josh Allen might not have a Jamar Chase or a T. Higgins, but Khalil Shakur is a pretty damn good slot receiver, and he has two great tight ends in Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox is the other one that's been there for many, many years, and he is the best offensive line in football with a pretty dang good defense as well. We know what the Chiefs are able to do, and we talk about the Bengals coaching staff a lot as well. I mean, Andy Reid, Sean McDermott, Harbaugh, or Zach Taylor. I think that matters as well for what you're asking your quarterback to do. So, I don't think that's a negative against Joe Burrow. I actually think when you look at the overall with how much these MVP candidates get assisted by their roster, I think it's a positive for Joe Burrow in these discussions, and it'll actually bump him up in a lot of these rankings.
Yeah, I agree.